Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets and Utah Jazz say, hold my beer for the Tankathon, a battle that takes overtime, but ultimately the Brooklyn Nets get the job done by getting that loss and shrinking the odds between them and a top draft pick. We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, a 112-111 overtime thriller between two teams that put out the kind of lineups that suggested they were hoping that this would be a loss. But you got to work hard. You got to work hard. When you look across the court and you see another team that says, no, I want to lose this game. Ultimately, it was fun. It was a fun game for two teams that both want to be losing more than they win.
I mean, a full-on Tankapalooza happened in this game. It was each team wanting to lose, they'll never admit it, but each team wanted to lose this one more than the team on the other side of the court. It was really funny to watch this kind of breakdown in real time, especially if you're on like X or wherever and you're following along with sort of like fan speak, which is a great proxy, I think, sometimes to just sort of see, like, if you're not in the actual crowd, to see how the rest of the crowd is reacting to something. And this is one of those situations where, I mean, it was so clear that there was a huge contingent of Net fans just cheering for a loss. But I have to say, it felt like the team was right along with it. I mean, with some of the decisions, and right. I don't think the players. I think the players were all playing hard. I think the one good thing about this is that even when teams are tanking, it doesn't really go down to the player level. The players on the court play hard, right? And I think that's good. But the rest of it's terrible, but that part's good. But this game, I mean, between the out of timeouts that the Jazz ran to kind of end the game, to watch the last few possessions, this was a very funny game to watch, and a game that's sort of important in the standings for the Nets to lose these games in Utah. We'll talk about everything that happened, but I think this was the first really window into a game where the fans, even sort of like the most anti-tank fans, can kind of see that, hey, these games kind of are going to matter at the end. If you have Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper in your crosshairs, you kind of have to be worse than the Jazz in the standings when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and you talk about, you look at the Tankathon odds here. We know the Nets are going to have the Portland Trailblazers coming up. They're going to have Charlotte coming up. And you look at Utah being ahead of them in the 5th position there, but now 10-28. The first team ahead of the Brooklyn Nets to be double-digit in wins. All of a sudden, it does, you go, oh, well, that means that you're catchable. That means that we can get across the line on moving up a spot here in the Tankathon odds. And it's also the other thing for me that when you look at this lineup, and there's no, obviously for Utah, they're not putting out any of their usual suspects here.
Real quick, no Lauri Markkanen, no Walker Kessler, no John Collins, no Keontae George. Do I have it all? I mean, those are the 4 big ones that basically start.
Patty Mills
didn't end up playing.
That was pretty important for them too. But yes, and so all those key players are out, and it's that funny. So to me, it was that funny thing of wherever Utah is and whatever they're trying to do. And we've heard a lot about Walker Kessler and the different discussions that have gone over the last couple of seasons. But when you look at it, it's the Jazz are in my opinion, are one step or one phase ahead. You're losing basketball games. You're staying near the top of the draft class. But when you look over the roster, you already feel like you have 2 or 3 key core players that are going to be a part of what you want to do going forward, or at a minimum have established, developed, and cemented what their value is. So if you want to make a swing, you're going to be capable of doing that. It's funny to see the Nets just kind of nipping at the heels of that same process. There's some guys we think could be a part of things going forward for Brooklyn. They haven't given that full season. Noah Clowney is now the guy you look at for Brooklyn, right? Some other odds and ends. But that to me was what stood out a little bit here. And that's, I think, what makes it so funny to watch a team like Utah, who probably always, as we talked about, every single year comes into their season the last few years and you go, so what is their plan? And then it kind of gets told to them as they lose a bunch of games and all of a sudden their young talent doesn't matter. And maybe it is that cautionary tale too for Brooklyn or for the fan base of, and we talked about this coming into the tank, that, hey, you can want to tank and want to get that top draft pick and want to get that talent. But just as a reminder, then you have to figure out how to win with that talent and start to build it up. And it can sometimes take more than just, oh, quick 2-year turnaround. We'll be right back in the mix. No, it can be a third year of not being so good and not knowing for sure if year number 4 is going to be brighter.
It's a little harder for them too because they have a geographical disadvantage, right? Like it's going to be harder for them to sign free agents. Like that's not going to be a free agent destination. There's going to be certain players that just don't want to show up there, right? And just play out 4 to 5 years there. So where the Nets, even if you think that they're, sort of little brother in the city, it's still considerably better from a free agent standpoint to have New York City as a backdrop than it is like, Utah. No shade against Utah. Utah's beautiful. It's just that like we just know that that's not a NBA player destination overall. So it's always going to be a little tougher. In terms of this game, it's funny. I think there are some it's funny. We usually are going to have these. I do think there are some takeaways from this game on a player level that we can look at. But in walking through sort of like the end game here, there was just some. We're not going to go play by play here, but there was just some absolutely hilarious things that happened at the end of this game. The Nets really try to get on the offensive boards, and they looked like they were going to be able to steal this one because they were really, really active. But the Jazz, Colin Sexton's basically the only guy at times that was getting anything done, and they ran and out of timeout. I mean, Collier was good too, but they ran a timeout where they just stood Sexton in the corner. They're like, no chance this guy's getting a shot to win the game. It was like, and then the final play of the game. I mean, I was sure Collier had lost the ball. I actually can't believe he kept the ball. He pushes the ball out in front of him, so almost like soccer style, and then runs between the two defenders, bullies his way through the two defenders to get to the ball. And it was just like this was one of these games where I was watching and thinking, I really was actually conflicted about what I was rooting for. I'm usually not like this. I've been pretty stringent on like just rooting for the wins because in game and then dealing with the consequences later. But this is one where I kind of found myself thinking, man, I wouldn't mind the Jazz winning this one, right? Like and there was just so many random plays at the end of the game that were 50-50 balls, or just like one player just doing something boneheaded, or like a bad shot, or wide open in a miss, or the Nets last play, which was like Claxton almost like underhanding the ball to the basket from the 3-point line, which was like so fitting. That was the way it was just like the way it ended, and it was just like with an absolute whimper. I don't know. I just found on like a game level this game to be totally hilarious from that standpoint.
And it was, and I'll just point out the one, and it's overtime sequence. It's Ben Simmons. He does his thing. He dishes to the corner. It's wide open. It's Tyrese Martin, a guy that we've talked about and been like excited to see that, hey, he's playing pretty well, even if he's in his mid-20s. What a good story for him, right? So you get excited for every time that he has an opportunity. Now 1 of 6 from beyond the arc, and kind of to your point, when that ball leaves his hands, I was very conflicted, right? Because in that moment you go, well, if this goes down, I'm going to go, nice, Martin, like way to drill it. And then I'm going to, son of a, hold on a second now. So when it clanks off, I think long, he goes long on it, bounces around. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. I guess, listen, the results are the results. I guess we'll live with it. He didn't make it. It looks like they're going to lose this game, and that is a different spot to be in, especially for, I think, you and I, who have said all year long and in the offseason as well. Listen, ball gets tipped up, and this is usually the way I look at all sports. Game starts, I root for my team to win because it's just more fun. It's a better way to spend a few hours on a Sunday. There is nothing worse, or to me, more disturbing than actively choosing to watch games for 3 hours and the entire time be like, God, I hope they get punched in the gut here. Good Lord, I hope they miss every single shot. I hope Jalen Wilson looks like he doesn't deserve to be in the NBA, right? It's not a part of my ability to look at those type of things and be honestly rooting for a negative outcome. And yet, there I was on Sunday thinking, hey, not too bad. Nets lose 112-111 in overtime. Coming up here in a second, though, individual performances were certainly there once again in this game, including Mr. Tosan. Did the Brooklyn Nets end up grabbing another nice developmental prospect who by the end of the year we may say, hey, you're a part of the new Brooklyn Nets core? We'll dive into that coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Ultimate College Basketball HC. Look, if you've ever dreamed of being a college basketball head coach, it's your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every detail of your program. You got the recruiting the players. You're going to hire the coaching staff, oversee the training camps, handling NIL deals. That's a new one, obviously. Wouldn't have been around in Doug's middle school days getting in on this game when he wanted to be a basketball coach. Managing scholarships, it's all in your hands. When it comes to game time, you get to draw up the offensive plays too. Set that strategy. Love that way. And that way you won't just affect the current season. It's going to shape the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach, lead your team to glory. There's a special offer for Locked On NBA listeners. Use promo code LOCKEDONCBB, all caps, inside the game store. You're going to get a free boost for your program. It's the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. Download Ultimate College Basketball HC. Just visit ultimate-cbb.com or look up in the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. And if we're done with that, or bring it along with you, talk to our friends over at Gametime, going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater. Some of your favorite memories are attending those concerts, attending those live events, just being there in person for when it all happens, attending the game. We're talking about an NBA basketball podcast here. Maybe you're going to go to a Nets game with that Game Time. Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events. They got the new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out all the fluff. It's going to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you head on over to Game Time right now, Tuesday got Knicks at Nets. That's starting at $68. It's a little crosstown rivalry, no surprise there that it's going to be a little heftier in the price. That's all right. Old friend Kevin Durant coming one day later. Start at $20. Suns at Nets. Got Heat at Nets there from $32. Some good deals, man. I mean, look, the Nets are tanking, but some of these, you're going to see some superstars come into the building here. You got the Knicks. You got Durant. You got Jimmy Butler while he's still on the Heat. Maybe
come on.
Bam Adebayo too. Guys who we know are still going to be on the team. It's all there for you over on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, the Brooklyn Nets falling 112 to 111 to the Utah Jazz in overtime and starting to shrink that little baby gap there that we talk about at the top of the draft odds and why it matters so much too. You know, we talk about, listen, will the Nets ever be able to catch the Washington Wizards? Nobody can. When you've got a 162 win percentage like Washington has, I mean, good Lord, what a clinic they're putting on about being terrible. But everything else.
Can I say one thing real quick? The Pistons did them such a solid last year by winning all those games or losing all those games in a row. The Wizards were just as bad, just as bad as let me just real quick. I'm pretty sure they had like very similar records when it was all said and done, except the Pistons did them. Yeah, they had one more win. They had one more win than the Pistons. One more win than the Pistons last year, but the Pistons did them a huge favor by just losing infinity games in a row. The Wizards were just as bad. God, they stink so bad. Anyway, sorry. I know this is about the Nets.
No, but it is. But
how can you contend? How can you contend with this level of ineptitude? Like you can't.
That's the problem, right? These guys are just so good at being so bad. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to match that type of lack of talent, drive, or decision making. But inside of that, at the top of the draft, 14% overall for number one, right? So the top three picks are all getting the same odds there. Top 152.1% for a top four pick. It's all the same odds. So as horrendous as Washington is, they still have the same chances as New Orleans or as Toronto at this current point. Charlotte there at 8-28 is obviously a team that you want to see try to get on track, even though they're 1-9 in their last 10. But the difference between where Brooklyn is right now, 37.2 for top four, 9% chance for the number one overall pick. The Jazz, 10.5%, 42.1%. And Charlotte in that fourth spot, 48.1%, 12.5%. So it's like trying to close the gap down to that top four has to be the dream and the goal here, just because it feels so much more significant that you are in the mix for that top pick. You're in the mix to maybe get those top two picks, by the way, which, listen, is Cooper Flag the ultimate? Well, yeah, of course it is. But it doesn't mean that you don't have other things going on there with Harper and feeling like we can still have a talent that is very buildable. So getting this, God, I can't believe I'm framing it this way. Getting this loss, what a great position it puts the Nets in here going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see how things unfold here. And by the way, just before we get into some player stuff coming out of this game, that now makes the fifth straight loss for the Brooklyn Nets. And outside of this game against Utah, where it's overtime and they're a bad team, and it's hard for either team to really be dominant in a game like this, they were doing some real losing, right? Double-digit losses in the four previous games: Philadelphia, Indiana, against Detroit even, and against Denver. When they come out of this, they got that Portland game, and then it's into the Clippers, the Lakers, OKC, New York, Phoenix, Miami, right? Like, this is now, when we talked about tank and we talked about, rough stretches of the season, you could turn around in the blink of an eye here if they don't beat Portland, which again, one of those games, knock on wood, you hope they don't. They're right behind them in the standings. you look back and you go, oh, 12, 13 game losing streak. And this is where you test your mettle about making it through. And if you're a fan still showing up, still watching the games, because it is about the ultimate goal, but we're in the dark. We are entering the dark days of it. I know the Nets are without certain key players, but you're also going to see the Cam Johnson trade come through here at some point. And I don't think that D'Lo is going to be necessarily the needle mover when he walks back out on the court, even with Cam Thomas. Like, I don't know. It's just, a reminder here about how bad this could get for very big stretches.
Yeah, it's just going to be. And I do think there are performances we can take away from this game that are, you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is something. It's not going to be, make the play in something. But it's like, you're starting to think about, because I think that at this point, the Nets brass are obviously, and the fans too, are starting to think about the future of the team. And like on a game to game basis, what can we take away? I mean, so a couple, the bad news first. Like Clowney was bad in this one, 0 for 10, 0 for 7 from the field, drops the 3-point percentage back down to actually under last year's, under 36. Sometimes when it's smaller sample size, it doesn't take much. You go 0 for 7 in a game, and you can start to tank some of your stuff. Also, like Claxton has looked weirdly not very good around the basket and stuff. I'm a little. There's been I hate to go negative here, but I just want to hit these two guys before we talk about Martin and Tosan, but. Yeah. Because these guys are going to be on the team for sure going forward. Claxton, I don't know at what point you get concerned, or you just say, oh, when you don't have a point guard, it's going to be harder for your bigs. But there's just been no real, has he done anything this year? Maybe this is a whole separate podcast that we can just do tomorrow or later on this week. But I don't want to call it stagnation, but there's been no improvement here on what's happening with him. The metrics just don't look very good. The at the rim finishing looks off. I don't know. Does that make sense? I don't want to go. Maybe this is a whole podcast. You can just stop us here and we'll go into the other guys. But those two guys, I do have them some concerns. One about the way Clowney has played this year, and we've talked about this many times. It's he's just basically a shooting guard, and Claxton just hasn't really shown why you would have signed him to a long-term deal. And I think that's a little bit of a concern.
There's something worth expanding on Claxton, so I won't go too deep on it, other than saying yes, it's been a concern, and I think it's harder to squint right now and do what we've done in the past, where you say yes, but when you have superstars, when you have talent X, when you have positional value of Y, then it always makes his life better, makes it easier, makes it all those things. Yes, it's probably true, but also now you signed $100+ million contract, and there's expectations that come with that. And having a drop off in your performance, even in a down year, even in a tank year, it would raise concerns if I'm Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets, and you're thinking about what's the short-term construction of our core as we get into next year's draft class. On Noah Clowney, I will say, because I think this is what brings it to fruition. Because we saw some fans when we talked about, he's been shooting all these threes and it's great that they're going down, but we were surprised that it seems to be somewhat singularly focused in this one area of development. And there's other areas defensively that we've looked at and said, is it as, good, or does it feel like it's taking that incremental steps forward? And some people seem to push back about, but look what he's doing. It doesn't matter. You're going to develop all these different areas. But this is a great example of a game where you go, okay, shot not falling. It'd be nice to look back at this one and say, yes, but he did these other things, just developmentally, right? There were the other area of his game that he focused into. You said 0 of 10 from the field, 0 of 7 from 3. So 70% of his shots, which is exactly his number. 69% is basically where he sits on in terms of 3-point shooting to overall shot selection. It just makes it hard. It's not nothing to get concerned about, but it's just a bummer that is the only aspect of his game right now that seems to be the driving force behind what he does on a game-to-game basis. And then that goes along with defensively, doesn't quite look as bouncy as he did a year ago, as versatile, as block hungry as he once was, right? So there's some things there that I think are just interesting, and you do stop and wonder,
when do you think real quick, when do you think Noah Claxton, sorry to interrupt you. When do you think Clowney last blocked a shot?
I'll say 10 games ago.
Dude, the last time he blocked a shot was on December 16th. December 16th. That's a month ago. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 games ago was the last time he blocked a shot. That's
never think that coming off of last season.
That's wild. Yeah, that's wild. Anyway, this wasn't even what we were going to talk about, but because I do want to talk about these two other guys, and some of the positives here, and maybe these are future, and I derailed this because this is not what Adam set up to talk about, but I do think But
this is how you know you can't just absorb a loss, though, or just absorb the tank, because even in the tank, even in a loss, even when it means to go,
well, these guys are going to be on the team.
Things I didn't appreciate about some of these players.
These guys are going to be on the team, though. Like, because the
Yep.
next two guys we're talking about, Tosan and Tyrese, like we're not sure. We'll see, right? Like, and we'll get into that after the break. But these guys, I can't actually believe now that I've actually just looked at this. Like, it's been 12 games and like 500 minutes or something like that since he actually blocked the shot. He's 6'10". He plays power forward. It's impossible.
not only Tosan and Tyrese coming up here in a second, and it is somewhat shocking that Noah Clowney has not seen a block since December. Also, though, I'm going to footnote a little Ben Simmons' performance and remind everybody why, even if he plays well, tragically, it won't matter in a year like this. We'll do that to close things out coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a small business, means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone. Know this all too well. Before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night, and your team grows. It becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's a #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate for just $15 a month. It's the cost of a few coffees. You get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. You also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. If you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. This is an absolute level up for businesses. If you're running your business through your phone like this, and we know this all too well, you absolutely need this. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone.
All right, so to tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about not only the 112-111 loss to the Utah Jazz, tightening up those odds there at the top of the draft board, which, by the way, the Jazz have one game in hand against Brooklyn. So depending on what their next games look like, you're going to see some opportunities maybe to close that gap even further. Want to talk about Tosan, want to talk about Tyrese. I want to very quickly footnote that normally when you come into a game 32 minutes, 7 of 11 from the field to go along with 9 assists and 6 rebounds, 14 points for Ben Simmons, we'd be having a conversation about that. We'd be talking about, hey, man, this guy's taking some real volume here to go and also setting up others, all those things. And it did resonate with me that because of his age, because of the expiring contract, because of everything that's gone in with Ben Simmons, I know me, like, I'm not going to spend a ton of time even talking about the good games for Ben Simmons because it doesn't matter. The way maybe talking about Tyrese Martin, maybe talking about Tosan is kind of just interesting because it means something for the future of the team. This Ben Simmons situation, it doesn't mean anything. And it's a tragedy. I hope it works out for him in terms of where he ends up next year, but it doesn't mean anything to the Brooklyn Nets, to this season or to the seasons going forward.
Yeah, I just that didn't close here. Part of that.
By the way, after all that great stat line, also not a part of the closing lineup because, as we know, that's a part of his game you cannot risk. Yeah,
just like he didn't. I mean, he closed regulation. He just didn't close overtime. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to use this as a transition because if you notice in overtime, the team that they were running at the very end of the game was Tosan, Tyrese, Zaire, Clowney, and Claxton. Tosan was like the point guard. He was like, he brought the ball up twice, 2 or 3 times up the court because it was like, to the point where it threw me off because he was dribbling up and I thought, wait a second, I thought that was Tosan, but is he just like running point for this team? And it was him, which is wild. So maybe they just have the Ben Simmons replacement here on the court already on a guy that they just brought in. He's been really impressive, man. I sometimes want to pump the brakes on these guys who have this like sort of like wide-ranging skill set, who aren't particularly great at anything, but not terrible at anything. And then they come in and just get a little bit of run with these bad teams. Cause he played a little bit with the Pistons last year too.
Yep.
And I'm always, cause these guys come and go in the NBA and I need to always kind of anchor myself in that. And that being said, I'm like, is he just good? Like, is he like the next 4th best player? Is he the next 4th best player? Like, is he the 3rd best player? Where does he rank like that right now? 7 for 8 from the field, 6 for 9 from the line, hit 2 clutch free throws. If you're going for the win, he hit 2 clutch free throws to almost ice the game. I don't know, man. Like it's hilarious. He's like, where does he stand right now on this with this team? 22 last game, 10 the game before, 13 the game before that, 36% from three, 57% from the field since he showed up. I don't know, man. It's just so funny to have these guys show up out of nowhere and then be like, I don't know, maybe a contract looks okay for a guy like him.
Maybe it doesn't look so bad. Listen, the last 3 games for him, double-digit scoring, played 29 minutes against Detroit, 22 against Denver. You mentioned this past game here was 7 of 8 and 2 of 3 from deep, but 2 of 5 the game prior against Denver, 4 of 9 from the field, 4 of 7 against Detroit. So from the field, it's working. The rebound numbers, 6 and 7 in a couple of these games. And to your point, like a little bit of ball handling. Now, this is always, I think, when you and I talk about where you see something happening that a lot of teams have these guys to different degrees and levels and value. But when you see something happening for the Brooklyn Nets that you don't see a lot of, and that is another guy that can handle the basketball, it just, your eyes just kind of perk up. You go, oh, well, that's a skill set that you would think more NBA players on an NBA roster would have, but the Nets don't have a ton of it. And, whether or not it pans out, when a guy is 23 years old, he's out of Princeton, which, by the way, crossed over to the NFL when Osivas for the Cincinnati Bengals was coming out. I was like, I love this kid. He's a late round pick. He's out of Princeton. Nobody respects him. And he came in and he made a name for himself. It's like, sometimes we talk about guys that were late first round picks that didn't quite blossom or spike. This is just a guy. This is just a guy that came in and has been working his butt off probably. And then you show up to a team that over the rest of this season is going to have minutes on a platter for you. Like, it's going to be your opportunity to take or lose, right? So hopefully, at the worst case scenario, and I said this about Tyrese Martin or any of these guys, give them big minutes, because they play a lot of minutes. The more sample size you get, the more you can confirm or deny if they are capable of being anything, whether it's a deep bench guy coming in, for games for 10 to 12 minutes on a good team, or someone maybe that has a shot here. I mean, I don't know. Why wouldn't I at the end of this year talk about Tosan if he can keep doing these type of things in the same breath that I would talk about Zaire Williams? Because it's all relative. Hey, you haven't quite figured it out in certain areas. You haven't been able to do certain things consistently. Okay, if the next guy can, it doesn't kind of matter what the name on the back of the jersey is, just whether or not you can be productive when you're given the opportunities.
And they're going to have minutes here. I mean, again, these guys are going to get traded. We don't know what's coming back. Injuries are continue to crop up. They're going to be, and the other thing with injuries too is they're going to be very, very hesitant with injuries. Like, no one's going to push early to come back on a timeline with the current Nets. Like, anyone who's anybody.
Whole other episode about Cam Thomas, I think, in the rest of this year, by the way, like in terms of injuries and management and stuff. I'm so fascinated about how they're going to.
If it's close, you're not playing. If it's even close, you're not playing. Like, that's going to be the marching orders, I think. So all these guys are going to get a chance. And I think we're just going to see a lot more of him. We've already seen a ton of Tyrese Martin, who's been good. I don't know. He shot poorly last night, but overall, he looks really competent on the ball. He can create his own shot. We know he can shoot threes, even though it's kind of dropped off here. It's dropped off a little bit over like the last month. He's down to 30% from three. Some of these are tough looks. I'll give him that. Like, he kind of gets stuck with some tough looks just because of the way the Nets offense ends up running, and he has to just put up some hand in his face threes and just, these aren't like open looks.
Some asks are too much for certain players when you put them in.
Like when you play with like Luka, right? When you play with Luka and your 3-point shot diet's going to look a little bit different than if, Ben Simmons is running point for you or whoever. I mean, and that's like the good version of it, like, or Keon Johnson or like whoever's running point. Like, these are going to be tougher shots, but he's looked really competent. Like, he's looked like a guy who can definitely hang in the league. He could be on a regular team, like deep end of bench guy on a good team, I think. And they've kind of needed what he does over the last 4 or 5 games, just from a functional basketball standpoint, getting up double-digit shots, playing 30 minutes, can ball handle a little bit. They have just so few ball handling guys who can ball handle. Like, they don't really have anybody. It's him. Yeah. It's Keon Johnson, kind of. It's Ben Simmons, sort of, but not like in the traditional sense. That's it. Like, that's the end of the guard play on this team. So I've been impressed with him. I don't think he's any like long-term contract kind of guy, but in terms of just keeping this team functional looking, he's been really, really important for that. Good on the boards too.
And with both these guys, you mentioned about Tosan and where he's played. Like, he played 13 games for Detroit last season. Okay, fine. This is the first opportunity. He's only played 5 games, 24 minutes right now in those 5 games. Already, though, averaging 20 minutes for Martin. Like, I think that's the part where we go, oh, these guys are just good. The one thing you have to look at is, well, have they had opportunities, right, to be on the court and to play extended minutes and to showcase whether or not they're capable of? Can they consistently, in the case of Martin, put up over 4+ 3-point attempts per game and be successful by and large at it? And the bigger the sample size gets, is the more confident you can feel in labeling a player as X. Same thing we talk about with Zaire Williams, right? Like, we hope things for him, but when the three-point shooting seems to always regress back to the career average, you go, then I guess maybe we just have to accept that he might not ever get there on that thing, right? Sample size is big enough. You can start to form those opinions. So it's good for both these young guys. And I think that's going to be a big theme of the rest of this season. Watching some of these young guys play and develop. And guess what? Maybe next year we'll be talking about, hey, here's our old friend Tosan coming onto the court for the other team that they're taking on a given night. But still fun at this point, as obviously the Brooklyn Nets start to have a little bit of what I like to call a spiral in terms of the losses.
All right, we'll be back. I think this week we'll talk a little bit Nic Claxton, like we said earlier in the episode. We'll talk about sort of like how his season has gone / not gone. Go ahead.
And then we got the Sean Marks, who like kind of he came out, made like definitive statements about being strategic about how they do things going forward, i.e. making sure they lose basketball games. Yeah. It's not going to be about wins and losses. Like, so kind of finally the public facing statement we've all known, but they're officially letting everybody know, yes, we're going that way with it. So we got a lot of things to talk about off the court this week.
All right, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen on podcasts.
There is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. And that is J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, man, one of the all-time great poets. R.I.P. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets.
He passed away?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Spoiler alert.
No, R.I.P. We'll never get the end of that book. Basketball, yeah.